The wind passed through the twisted branches, carrying the damp scent of the earth, and something else. Something ancient. Rio wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, his arm muscles burning after another long day at the forge. He shouldn't be here. Old Masaru always said this part of the forest was off limits. Not that there was any real punishment for stepping in, but the stories, they stuck with you. People disappeared. Voices called out names no one remembered. Rio's foot brushed against something hard. He looked down. The ground around him was disturbed, as if something had been recently dug up. His fingers grazed the cold, mud-covered object. He pulled it out, and the moonlight revealed what he was holding. A samurai mask. It shouldn't be here. Rio turned the object over, studying the intricate carvings in the dark wood. It was beautiful, but there were cracks in the surface, and stains that looked like blood. A chill ran down his spine. Then he placed it on his face, and the world around him vanished. Rio returned to the village with a heavy heart. The mask seemed to pulse in his hands as though it were still alive. He tried to ignore the cold creeping down his spine, tried to convince himself that it was all just a delirium brought on by exhaustion. But then, the whispers started. At first they were faint, like a distant murmur carried by the wind. But with each passing night, they grew clearer, more insistent. The nameless samurai spoke of betrayal, of blood, of justice, of revenge. Rio began to investigate, at first quietly, asking the elders of the village about the past, about samurai who had fallen in battle. Most of them looked away, as if the subject were forbidden. Others simply said it was best to forget. But Rio couldn't forget. And then he found the answers. In the ancient records of the village, written on brittle scrolls weathered by time, one name appeared again and again: Takeshi. A loyal warrior, murdered by his own comrades under the orders of a greedy feudal lord. The traitors hadn't just escaped punishment. Their descendants still ruled the village. The spirit whispered once more, "You know the truth. Now do what must be done." Rio's hands trembled. He wasn't a warrior, just a blacksmith. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Takeshi's face, the cuts in his armor, the blood mixing with the mud. If he did nothing, he would be allowing the injustice to continue. But how far would he go to honor the memory of a man long dead? Rio couldn't sleep anymore. The voices in his head had become more than whispers. Now they were commands. Commands that came with vision, not just flashes of the past, but something darker. He saw the village houses in flames. He saw men falling to their knees, begging for their lives. He saw his own hands holding a sword. The spirit of Takeshi was shaping him. That night, he made a decision. If he wanted justice, he needed proof. If he wanted the village to know the truth, he had to find something concrete. Then he remembered the ancient graves on top of the hill, where the first samurai of the village had been buried. If Takeshi's story had been erased, maybe his tomb still held the truth. With the mask hanging from his belt, he walked up there. The full moon bathed the moss-covered tombstones in pale light. Rio ran his fingers over the names carved in the stone until he found what he was looking for. Takeshi Ishikawa. The tomb was sealed, but something was wrong. The name engraved there seemed incomplete. Part of it had been scratched out, as if someone had tried to erase his existence. Rio touched the mask, and in that instant, he felt a jolt run through his body. The visions hit harder. He saw Takeshi kneeling before his comrades, his sword lying beside him. He saw the faces of the traitors, men who carried the same last name as the wealthiest families of the village. And then he heard the truth. Takeshi wasn't just betrayed. He was erased from history. His name was forbidden. His bloodline hunted to the last child. The spirit roared in his mind. "Now you see? They must pay!" Rio stumbled back, fighting the dizziness. He wanted justice. But this was vengeance. And Takeshi would accept nothing less than blood. The spirit no longer gave him any rest. Rio felt its presence at every moment, in the distorted reflections on the water, in the shadow that didn't match his movements, in the invisible weight pressing down on his shoulders. But the worst were the dream. In the latest one, he was no longer a blacksmith. He was a warrior. He wore Takeshi's armor, felt the hilt of the katana in his hands, and he saw the descendants of the traitors kneeling before him, waiting for the blade to fall. He woke up with the metallic taste of blood in his mouth. The spirit was shaping him, but Ryo didn't want to be an instrument of vengeance. He needed to act before it was too late. The next morning, he went to the house of the village chief, Lord Hideo, one of the last descendants of the clan that had condemned Takeshi. He carried with him the ancient records he had found. If he could expose the truth, maybe he could end the cycle of injustice without bloodshed. But as soon as he entered the main hall, he knew he had made a mistake. Lord Hideo was already waiting for him, surrounded by guards. On the table in front of him were the scrolls Ryo thought he had hidden. "You dug too deep, blacksmith." Ryo took a step back. His heart hammered like a war drum. "The village deserves to know the truth." Hideo sighed, almost bored. "The truth doesn't matter, boy. What matters is who tells the story." He made a gesture with his hand. The guards advanced. Ryo tried to run, but the door was already blocked. He wasn't a warrior. He didn't have a sword. He had nowhere to go. The spirit whispered in his mind. "Put on the mask." Ryo hesitated. But when the first blade rose against him, his hand was already on his belt. The cold wood touched his face. And then, everything changed. The world became a blur. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of iron and ash. The mask burned against Ryo's face, but he didn't take it off. He couldn't. Because now, he was no longer just Ryo. He was Takeshi. The guards advanced. But before they could strike, Ryo moved. His feet slid across the floor with the precision of a seasoned warrior. His body knew what to do before his mind could even give the command. He dodged the first strike, twisted behind, grabbed the enemy's wrist and wrenched it until the bone snapped. The sword fell to the ground. Ryo snatched it up before it could even touch the wood. His heart pounded in time with the battle. Another guard attacked. Ryo leaned sideways, feeling the blade pass mere millimeters from his face. Before the opponent could recover, he was already in motion. A precise cut, not deep enough to kill, just enough to incapacitate. Hideo rose, eyes wide in shock. What are you?" Ryo gasped for breath. His hands trembled, but it wasn't fear. It was something darker. The spirit was in control now. "You already know the answer." The voice was different, deeper, older. Hideo staggered back. The remaining guards hesitated. "Please." Hideo's voice faltered. "I had nothing to do with this. It was my grandfather, not me." The spirit roared inside Ryo's mind. "They are all guilty. They all must pay." Ryo raised the sword. The fear on Hideo's face mirrored what he had seen in his visions. The same fear in the faces of the traitors from the past, in that final moment before Takeshi fell. The cycle of vengeance was about to be completed. But then, something inside him resisted. His mother's words echoed in his mind, from when he was just a child. The weight of the blade isn't in the hand that holds it, but in the choice to wield it. Ryo closed his eyes and dropped the sword. The metal clattered to the floor. The mask fell with it. The spirit roared in fury, but its power was already fading. Without the mask, Ryo was just Ryo. He looked at Hideo. The man trembled, waiting for a blow that never came. "The truth will be known." Ryo turned to the guards. "But the blood stops here." Silence. Then one of the guards lowered his blade. Another followed. The cycle was broken. The spirit disappeared. The mask lay on the ground, still, just a piece of old wood. The weight of the spirit had vanished. Ryo staggered, feeling the emptiness left by the fury that had once consumed him. For the first time in days, his mind was silent. Hideo fell to his knees, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. The guards didn't move. The fear was still there, but something else was beginning to show in their eyes. Respect. The door opened. The villagers had gathered outside, drawn by the noise. Murmurs filled the hall as they saw Hideo helpless and Ryo standing, unarmed. An old woman stepped forward, hesitantly. Her face was wrinkled with age, but her eyes still held the light of someone who remembered. You saw, didn't you?" Her voice was a thread of hope. Ryo nodded. "The truth. I saw it all." The crowd murmured. Takeshi's name was spoken aloud for the first time in decades. The silence of years had finally been broken. Hideo lowered his head. He knew he could no longer hide the past. The name his grandfather had tried to erase was back, and this time, no one would forget it. Rio looked at the mask one last time. Then, he grabbed a shovel and began to dig. When he was done, he buried the mask there, beneath the earth, where Takeshi's bones should have rested long ago. Justice wasn't in the blade, it was in the truth. He left before dawn, without saying where he was going. But as he walked away from the village, something told him that at last both he and the spirit had found peace. If I were in Rio's place, would I have made the same choice? Or would the blade have fallen? Can justice truly exist without revenge? Leave your comment and share your opinion. And if you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like and follow for more tales like this. The truth cannot be erased, and stories like this need to be told.